MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter Ali Vitale is there in Chappaqua ahead of today's deposition. Also with us, our senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, MS Now legal analyst, former Manhattan Assistant DA Catherine Christian, and Politico's White House and Foreign Affairs correspondent Eli Stokols. Lots to discuss. Ali, talk about this extraordinary moment for the Oversight Committee and what information lawmakers hope to get out of Hillary Clinton.
Well, I'm glad that you delineate between what's happening today and what's happening tomorrow, Anna, because, yes, this is an extraordinary moment. The Oversight Committee finally getting to the table with the Clintons after a protracted back and forth that really began at the end of last summer. The Clintons going back and forth with the Oversight Committee about the when, the how for this deposition, especially because the Clintons themselves wanted it to become public. It's not abnormal for committees to do closed-door depositions before they take something into the public hearing arena, and yet there's really nothing normal about subpoenaing a former president and a former Secretary of State, especially in a probe like this one, given the landscape. When you talk about Hillary Clinton, yes, she is mentioned hundreds of times in the files, but that's because Epstein was sending news clippings mentioning her presidential campaign, not because of her correspondences. And so that is a key difference between what we're looking at today and what we're looking at tomorrow. But I want to play for you the way that the Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer is sort of casting today, the way he's framing it and thinking about it. Listen to what he said yesterday on the Hill.
Epstein, who, again, wasn't the most honest person in the world, I think we've all seen that, made a lot of comments about how active he was in raising money for the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Initiative. So those will be the questions that we ask.
And then are you going to let them have a public hearing afterwards?
If they want one, they can come. My members would love to have the Clintons in front of a public hearing. I'm, trying to be nonpartisan in this investigation because I think the American people overwhelmingly agree, regardless of ideology, that people need to be held accountable for this.
So, look, he's committing to a public hearing there. I think the open question on the part of the Clintons was, if you're so eager to get us in a public forum, we are more than happy to do it first. Let's just get it over with. That's one of the things that in my conversations with sources leading up to today continues to come up in conversations with Clinton allies. And then I think the other piece of it, too, is the ways in which Comer is now opening up, I think, a few different lines of inquiry. Certainly I and others have been asking him on Capitol Hill, OK, I understand if you want to talk to former President Bill Clinton, it makes sense. You see him in the files. Certainly you have questions that you can ask and he can answer. But then it also begs the question of, shouldn't you be asking that of, say, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, or even certainly the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, given the number of times that Trump himself is mentioned in there, that Mar-a-Lago is mentioned in there, and of course the allegations that Lisa has been talking about that were initially removed from the DOJ's release of Epstein files in regards to Trump. Comer has consistently said, well, Trump's answered questions on the record about that in the past, but not before a committee and not under oath.
Okay, Ali, stay with us here. Lisa, so many pieces to discuss. Let's start sort of where Ali left off, and that is so many prominent people are mentioned in these files as friends or associates of Epstein. Again, no other people have been suspected or charged or convicted other than Ghislaine Maxwell of criminal wrongdoing in relation to Epstein. But we know Bill Clinton is in the files numerous times. Is Hillary Clinton?
No, I think what Ali said, Ali and I, first of all, have a lot of inadvertent mind meld here, because I was going to make the same point, that there is a really important distinction to be drawn here between the two Clintons. And in some respects, the legal strategy that they took with the committee disserved Hillary Clinton in that they presented a united front about the fact that they both did not have relevant information for the committee. They also argued that there was no valid legislative purpose. And yet, when you look at the files, she is right to say that Hillary Clinton comes up as an object of fascination for Epstein multiple times. The same can be said, by the way, of the current president. I also want to emphasize that neither Clinton has been accused of any wrongdoing associated with the files, but there is a distinction to be drawn. The one thing that I think the committee is on solid ground in asking about today is twofold, Anna. One, records show that Jeffrey Epstein visited the White House when Bill Clinton was president 17 times. It's worth asking, did Hillary Clinton have any interactions that she recalls with him during that period of time? And of course, Ghislaine Maxwell was a guest at their daughter Chelsea's wedding in 2010. She was there, allegedly, because she was the then girlfriend of a man named Ted Waite, who was a friend of both Clintons. But at the time Hillary Clinton was the sitting Secretary of State, Bill Clinton, obviously a former president, The security around the guest list at Chelsea Clinton's wedding, I imagine, is like nothing at any of the weddings or other celebratory events that any of us have attended. It's worth asking what investigation was done, what probing was done to ensure that everybody who set foot into that event was properly cleared to be at an event with a president, a former president, and a sitting Secretary of State. It was at a period of time where we didn't know anything about Ghislaine Maxwell, equivalent to what we know now. But were those rumors things that were in sort of the circle around her at the time?
Of all the people, Catherine, that this committee could be focusing on and trying to get questions answered from, does it make sense to you that Hillary Clinton is such a priority?
No. The only questions, Lisa was correct, that they should want to know, were you there and present when Mr. Epstein visited the White House? Hillary, her daughter's wedding. Well, the security would not have been by Hillary or Bill. It would have been by the Secret Service. So ask the Secret Service those questions. This, in my opinion, is just a way to either embarrass Secretary Clinton or put her in a perjury trap. She really does not have really relevant and material information related to Jeffrey Epstein other than those two questions when she tangentially maybe ran into him at the White House. Her daughter's wedding, I doubt she was focusing on anything other than her daughter and the nuptials. So this really is not, this is a distraction away from the real questions about Epstein. Her husband, definitely. There are a bunch of questions I would ask him. First, I would start about what were you doing that's either a pool or a hot tub with Ghislaine Maxwell? What was the date of that? But in terms of Secretary Clinton, no. And her lawyers will not do this. But her lawyers could actually advise her, if they ask you about confidential communications between you and your husband, you can say they're privileged, and I'm not answering that question. For political reasons, she probably won't do that, but she might have been advised to do that.
Eli, this isn't the first time the Clintons are facing potentially hostile questioning. I wonder, do those past episodes give a sense of how they might handle this? And could a public hearing, if one in fact does happen, because Hillary Clinton has been very outspoken and calling for that, could that backfire on Republicans?
We'll have to see, Anna, but I've talked to a lot of Clinton allies and prominent Democrats who pointed to her 11 hours of testimony as Secretary of State during House Republicans' hearings on Benghazi as evidence that, you know, this is a woman who has been in the hot seat before and held up pretty well. James Carville described this as sort of the dog that caught the car, and James Comer now getting the Clintons in to testify and suggesting that both Bill and Hillary Clinton would run circles around Jim Comer when it comes to the questioning. That's part of why they might want a public trial, or a public hearing, rather. So, you know, we'll see how this goes. But I think, you know, the Clintons are going to be prepared if history tells us anything. And certainly there's a lot of frustration within the Clinton camp about the process that led to this. Some Democratic House members voting with Republicans to threaten to hold the Clintons in contempt if they didn't come forward. That sort of broke open some divisions among sort of more senior members of the House Oversight Committee and younger members who were very willing to go along, sort of saw this in more absolutist terms that, you know, anybody whose subpoena needs to comply, believing very much in the process, while some older Democrats saw this as kind of saw that as a naive vote, and that the younger members who voted with Republicans didn't appear to recognize this as a MAGA show trial, as one put it. So we're going to see how this plays out. Maybe, you know, because this isn't a public hearing, but the Clintons will have their say afterwards and could attempt to get ahead of any slicing and dicing and selective presentation by House Republicans if they want to come out and talk about what was discussed after this.
Ali, Congressman Garcia, the ranking Democrat on the committee, says these depositions are now setting a new precedent. And Chairman Comer has said he wants a nonpartisan investigation when he was asked on Fox News whether they plan to call Republicans before their committee. So can we expect them to do that, calling people like Commerce Secretary Lutnick or even President Trump?
And see, this is where that word nonpartisan gets to be really sticky because, yes, it would make sense for this entire thing to be nonpartisan. There is nothing nonpartisan about wanting to combat sex trafficking and get justice for these victims. And yet, in this circumstance in Washington, we see the politics coming up against the reality time and again. Consider the fact for a moment that when we talk about why the Clintons feel that this is sort of a procedural foul, the reason that they argued this for so long, the reason that there were the dynamics between younger and older Democrats back in Washington on the House side, as Eli was just talking about, is because there are other subpoenas, for example, the one to the Attorney General that the committee also sent last summer, that they feel have not been complied with. Because right now the Attorney General is, yes, dealing with the compulsion mechanisms of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, but is also not contending with the still out there subpoena from the Oversight Committee. And so multiple Democratic members have said to me, okay, if we're going to go forward and try to push a contempt of Congress referral against the Clintons for defying their subpoena, why are we not doing the same thing for a DOJ that has clearly not been in compliance with the transparency laws that they are now required to be in compliance with? And so there's so many layered dynamics here. And of course, the politics on top of it, of the fact that they are going after Democrats and not hauling the same kinds of Republicans who also have valid questions to answer in front of this same committee.